Eleanor Jenkins had been teaching at Westridge High School for 35 years. 35 years in the same classroom, with its faded inspirational posters and view of the football field. 35 years of watching Millfield change around her while the invisible line dividing the town remained firmly in place. The East Side, with its well-maintained historic homes and manicured parks, had always been predominantly white. The West Side, with its aging apartment complexes and neglected infrastructure, was mostly black and Hispanic. The school district had been drawn specifically to ensure Westridge High remained East Side, despite being just 2 blocks from the dividing line of Elmwood Avenue. When Eleanor started teaching in 1987, the divide was explicit. People spoke openly about good and bad neighborhoods. By 2022, the language had changed, but the reality hadn't. People talked about up-and-coming areas and challenging school zones instead, but the map of opportunity remained the same. As Eleanor pulled into her usual parking spot on a crisp October morning, she noticed an unfamiliar car beside her saw-battered blue Honda Civic that had seen better days. Not the typical vehicle for Westridge staff, who mostly drove late-model SUVs and sensible sedans. The faculty meeting that morning explained the anomaly. Principal Harrington, a tall man with a politician's smile, stood at the front of the room with a young black woman. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Maya Wilson, our new AP history teacher. Miss Wilson comes to us from Carson High and will be taking over Mr. Peterson's classes following his unexpected retirement." Eleanor studied the newcomer with interest. Maya Wilson looked to be in her late 20s, with natural hair styled in a neat twist and a professional but inexpensive pantsuit. She stood with shoulders back, chin high, meeting the curious and in some cases skeptical gazes of her new colleagues. Carson High, the bad school on the west side. Eleanor had never known a teacher to move from Carson to Westridge. The transfer usually went the other way, with burned-out Westridge teachers being reassigned to Carson as a form of unofficial demotion. After the meeting, Eleanor made her way to Maya's classroom. The young woman was arranging books on her desk, the sleeves of her blazer now rolled up as she worked. "Welcome to Westridge," Eleanor said. "I'm Eleanor Jenkins, American Literature, next door." Maya looked up, her expression cautious, but warming slightly at Eleanor's smile. "Thank you. It's quite a change from Carson." "I imagine so. If you need anything supplies, advice on the copy machine's quirks, or just someone to have lunch with, my door's always open." "I appreciate that." Maya hesitated. "Actually, there is one thing. I heard there's an unwritten rule about the AP track here." Eleanor sighed. She knew exactly what Maya was referring to. "Yes, though no one would admit it officially. The counselors tend to guide certain students away from AP courses, usually West Side kids who get in through the lottery. Each year, Westridge accepted 30 students from outside its district boundaries through a lottery system, a half-hearted attempt at integration that mostly served to maintain the appearance of fairness while changing nothing." "That's what I thought," Maya said, her jaw tightening slightly. "The same thing happened at my high school 20 years ago. I was one of those West Side kids advised to take a more appropriate course load." Eleanor felt a familiar flush of shame. She'd witnessed this soft discrimination for decades, but had never done more than privately disagree. "Things move slowly here," she offered lamely. "Too slowly," Maya replied, but her tone remained professional. "Anyway, thank you for the welcome. I may take you up on that lunch offer soon." As Eleanor walked back to her classroom, she felt an unexpected spark of something she hadn't experienced in years of disruption to the comfortable routine she'd settled into. Maya Wilson was clearly not going to quietly assimilate into Westridge's culture of polite inequality. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor wondered if that might be exactly what this school needed. 2 weeks after Maya's arrival, Eleanor was grading papers in her classroom when she heard raised voices from next door. She hesitated, then set down her red pen and went to investigate. Maya stood at the front of her classroom, arms crossed, facing a red-faced man in an expensive golf shirt. Richard Keller, Eleanor recognized, father of Westridge's lacrosse team captain and a major donor to the school. My son has maintained a 4.0 GPA his entire high school career, Keller was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. And now, suddenly, he's getting a C in your class? Yes, Mr. Keller, because his essay demonstrated a C-level understanding of Reconstruction. I provided detailed feedback on how he can improve. This is ridiculous. Brian is applying to Yale, early decision. His grandfather is an alum. This C could jeopardize everything he's worked for. Maya didn't blink. Then I suggest Brian put more work into his next assignment. I'm happy to review drafts during my office hours if he'd like additional guidance. Eleanor lingered in the doorway, ready to intervene if needed. But Maya handled Keller with a calm professionalism that eventually had him retreating, though not before making a thinly veiled threat about discussing this with Harrington. When he'd gone, Maya exhaled slowly and noticed Eleanor. Sorry you had to witness that, Maya said, straightening some papers on her desk. I'm sorry you had to experience it, Eleanor replied. Unfortunately, it won't be the last time. Oh, I know. I've dealt with parents like him before. The difference is at Carson, they didn't have the principal's private number on speed dial. Eleanor smiled wryly. True, but Harrington's not completely under their thumb. He talks a big game to donors, but he usually backs his teachers in the end. Maya looked unconvinced. We'll see. It's not just the parents, though. It's the system. Do you know I have only four West Side students in all my AP classes combined? And they're all keeping their heads down, trying not to be noticed. Eleanor nodded. She'd observed the same pattern for years. West Side kids learn quickly that drawing attention can make their already precarious position here even more difficult. One girl, Zoe Washington, incredibly bright, asks insightful questions when we're one-on. One hasn't spoken once during class discussions. Meanwhile, Brian Keller dominates every conversation with half-formed opinions his father probably fed him over breakfast. The frustration in Maya's voice resonated with Eleanor's own buried feelings. How many talented West Side students had passed through her classroom over the years, their potential minimized by a system designed to favor the Brian Kellers of the world? What are you going to do? Eleanor asked. Maya gathered her belongings. Change things. Starting with my grading policy. No more points for participation that reward the loudest voices. No more extra credit opportunities that only benefit students with resources and time. Just clear, consistent evaluations of what they actually know. It sounded simple, but Eleanor knew it would send shockwaves through Westridge's carefully maintained hierarchy. Over the next month, Eleanor watched with growing admiration as Maya methodically implemented her vision. Despite pressure from parents and subtle resistance from some colleagues, she held firm. Gradually, the dynamic in her classroom began to shift. Zoe Washington raised her hand during a discussion about the civil rights movement. Another West Side student, Marcus Jones, started a study group that attracted students from both sides of Elmwood Avenue. And most surprisingly, some of the East Side students, the ones who valued genuine learning over easy as began, gravitating to Maya's classroom during lunch periods. One afternoon, Eleanor overheard a conversation between Zoe and Maya after class. My mom says you went to Carson too, Zoe said tentatively. I did. Class of 2013. And now you're teaching AP History at Westridge. There was a note of wonder in the girl's voice. The world is bigger than Millfield and its artificial boundaries, Zoe. Remember that. Eleanor slipped away before they noticed her, a lump forming in her throat. In 35 years, had she ever given a student that kind of hope? By December, tensions at Westridge had reached a breaking point. Maya's refusal to bend her standards had resulted in unprecedented grades for many previously straight. Students' parents had complained to Harrington, who called Maya in for multiple discussions, that she emerged from looking determined rather than chastened. Student opinion had split sharply. Some, mostly those who had benefited from the old system, openly resented her. Others defended her fiercely, appreciating her transparency and fairness. Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn into Maya's orbit, offering support first through silent solidarity, then through active collaboration. For the first time in years, she felt energized by her work, reminded of why she'd become a teacher in the first place. When Maya proposed a joint project between their classicist and oral history of Millfield focusing on how the town's development had affected different communities, Eleanor agreed immediately, despite knowing it would invite scrutiny. "We'll have students interview long-time residents from both sides of town," Maya explained over lunch in Eleanor's classroom. "They'll create a documentary, combining these personal narratives with historical context about redlining, urban renewal, and school districting decisions." "The school board will hate it," Eleanor warned, though she was already mentally reorganizing her syllabus to accommodate the project. "Probably," Maya agreed. "But it's all factual. They can't argue with history." "Oh, they certainly can try," Eleanor laughed. "But I think it's worth doing anyway." The project launched in January. Students were paired across Eleanor and Maya's classes, intentionally mixing East and West Side residents. They received training in interview techniques, documentary filmmaking, and historical research methods. Some parents objected, of course. Richard Keller led the charge, arguing that the project was politically motivated and divisive. But enough parents, including some influential East Side families who recognized the educational values, supported it that Harrington reluctantly allowed it to continue. As the students delved into Millfield's history, they uncovered uncomfortable truths. They found city council minutes from the 1960s explicitly discussing how to maintain neighborhood character by preventing integration. They discovered that the placement of Westridge High had been deliberately chosen to serve the East Side, despite a location closer to the town center making more logistical sense. Most powerfully, they recorded testimonies from elderly residents who remembered when Elmwood Avenue became the dividing line not by accident, but by design. "They didn't want us buying homes over there," said Mrs. Robinson, an 87-year-old West Side resident interviewed by Zoe and her East Side partner, Emma Friedman. "Banks wouldn't give mortgages to black families for East Side properties, called it redlining. Said we'd bring down property values." Another resident, Mr. Gaines, described how the original high school, which had served the entire town, was closed in the 1970s and replaced with Westridge and Carson, effectively resegregating a student population that had begun to integrate. "It was never about neighborhood schools," he told Marcus Jones and his partner. "It was about keeping things separate." As the interviews accumulated and students began editing their footage, something remarkable happened. East Side students who had never questioned their advantages began asking uncomfortable questions. West Side students who had kept quiet for years found their voices. And in the teacher's lounge, conversations shifted. Some teachers resisted, clinging to the narrative that Millfield's divisions were natural and meritocratic. But others began reconsidering their own complicity in maintaining the status quo. Even Harrington, after watching a rough cut of the documentary, seemed shaken. "I had no idea about some of this history," he admitted to Eleanor privately. "Still, I'm concerned about the reaction when this is made public." "Sometimes discomfort is necessary for growth," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with her boldness. The documentary screening was scheduled for March as part of a community event. Maya and Eleanor knew they were taking a risk, but the educational impact already justified the project in their minds. What they didn't anticipate was how quickly events would escalate beyond their control. 2 weeks before the scheduled screening, disaster struck. Brian Keller, still smarting from his lowered GPA, obtained a rough cut of the documentary from his project partner and showed it to his father. Richard Keller wasted no time. He scheduled an emergency meeting with Harrington and several school board members, claiming the project was creating a hostile environment and teaching students to resent their town. By the next morning, Maya and Eleanor were summoned to Harrington's office. "The board wants the project shut down," Harrington said, looking genuinely regretful. "They're threatening funding cuts if we proceed with the screening." "On what grounds?" Maya demanded. "Everything in that documentary is historically accurate." "The concern is about age appropriateness and political bias," Harrington replied, using air quotes that made clear these weren't his words. Eleanor, who had rarely challenged authority in her long career, found herself speaking up. "These students have done rigorous academic work. Censoring them would teach exactly the wrong lesson, that power matters more than truth." Harrington sighed. I agree with you both, personally. But my hands are tied. The compromise is that student grades won't be affected, but the public screening is canceled. Maya stood. That's not acceptable. These students have worked for months. The community members who shared their stories deserve to be heard. I'm sorry, Miss Wilson. The decision is final. News of the cancellation spread quickly through the school. By lunch period, students were organizing. Zoe Washington and Emma Friedman created an online petition. Marcus Jones and several other students called local news outlets. Even some East Side parents, impressed by their children's newfound engagement with civic issues, began questioning the board's decision. Maya and Eleanor found themselves in the uncomfortable position of neither encouraging nor discouraging this student activism. As teachers, they had to maintain professional boundaries. As people who believed in the project's value, they couldn't bring themselves to undermine it. 3 days after the cancellation announcement, Richard Keller escalated the situation dramatically. Through connections on the school board, he orchestrated a formal review of Maya's teaching, citing concerns about classroom conduct and curriculum choices. The implication was clear. Maya's job was in jeopardy. Eleanor was furious. This is blatant intimidation. We need to fight it. How? Maya asked, looking exhausted. I'm still on probationary status. They don't need cause to let me go. We'll get the students' parents involved. Many of them support the project. And the teachers' union? The union will protect you, Eleanor. You're tenured. But me? Maya shook her head. I knew the risks when I decided not to just go along with the system here. Eleanor felt a wave of shame. How many times had she chosen safety over challenging injustice? How many times had she witnessed inequity and looked away? I'm not letting you face this alone, she said firmly. If they're coming after you, they'll have to come after me too. Before they could formulate a plan, students took matters into their own hands. Led by Zoe Washington and, surprisingly, Brian Keller, who had had a change of heart after witnessing his father's heavy-handed tactics, they organized an alternative screening at the West Side Community Center. When Eleanor and Maya learned about it, they were torn. Attending would be seen as defiance of the board's decision. Not attending would abandon their students at a crucial moment. We could lose our jobs, Eleanor said, though her mind was already made up. I know, Maya replied, but some things matter more. The night of the screening, they arrived to find the community center packed, not just with students and their families, but with community members from both sides of Elmwood Avenue. Local reporters clustered near the entrance. Even some teachers from Carson High had come to show support. As the documentary played, a hushed attention fell over the room. The students had created something remarkable, not an angry denunciation, but a thoughtful examination of how policies and everyday decisions had shaped their town over decades. They didn't shy away from uncomfortable truths, but neither did they reduce complex history to simple villains and heroes. Instead, they asked viewers to consider how systems perpetuate themselves when good people remain silent. When the lights came up, the applause was thunderous. Students who had never been in the spotlight beamed with pride. Parents wiped away tears. And Eleanor, looking around the room, saw something she'd rarely witnessed in Millfield people, from both sides of Elmwood Avenue coming together, really seeing each other perhaps for the first time. The aftermath was not an immediate happy ending. As expected, the school board was furious. Harrington was reprimanded for failing to control his staff, and formal disciplinary proceedings were initiated against both Maya and Eleanor. But something had shifted in Millfield. The documentary, uploaded online by students, went viral locally and then nationally. News outlets picked up the story. Students censored for telling town's true history. Civil rights organizations offered legal support. And parents, including influential East Side families who'd been moved by their children's work, began attending school board meetings in unprecedented numbers. 3 weeks after the screening, Richard Keller resigned from the board's fundraising committee, citing personal reasons. The disciplinary proceedings against Maya and Eleanor were quietly dropped, and most significantly, the board announced a community dialogue initiative to address long-standing inequities in the district. It wasn't a revolution. Elmwood Avenue still divided the town. Westridge still had more resources than Carson, but cracks had appeared in the foundations of a system that had seemed immovable for generations. On the last day of school, Zoe Washington stopped by Maya's classroom, where Maya and Eleanor were packing up for summer. "I got my acceptance letter from Howard University," she announced, beaming. "Full scholarship." "That's wonderful," Maya said, giving her a hug. "They're lucky to have you." "I'm going to study education policy," Zoe continued. "I want to come back and finish what we started here." After she left, Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the year's events and their meaning. "You know, I've been teaching here for 35 years, she said quietly. "All this time, I thought I was being kind by treating my West Side students well within a broken system. I never considered that the kindest thing might be to challenge the system itself." Maya sat beside her. "It's never too late to learn that lesson. Look at what you helped create this year." Eleanor smiled. "No, look at what you created. You came here and refused to accept things as they were. And you backed me up when it counted. That took courage." They sat in companionable silence, considering the uncertain future. Maya had been offered a contract renewal, a small miracle given the controversy, and had decided to stay. Eleanor had announced her retirement, but planned to remain involved through a new community education initiative. "Do you think anything will really change?" Eleanor finally asked. Maya considered the question. "Not overnight. But those students, they won't unlearn what they've discovered. They'll carry it forward. And that's how real change happens." Outside the window, students streamed toward waiting buses, moving between the worlds that Millfield had created for them. But some were crossing boundaries that had once seemed impermeable, calling goodbye to friends from the other side of Elmwood Avenue, making plans for summer that ignored the town's invisible lines. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in 35 years, Eleanor Jenkins believed that might be enough.